All right, strategists, get ready to dive deep, because today we're looking at Aces in Armor. It's a World War II board game that'll have you making those tough calls and leading your armies to victory.
And you know what I think is really cool about Aces in Armor?
What's that?
It takes like all those complicated World War II strategies and it turns them into a game that anyone can pick up and play.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
So let's break it down. In Aces in Armor, your main objective is to control as many factories as you can on the board. Those factories, they're like your lifeline.
Yeah, they're essential.
They're essential for you to pump out new units, and you know what else?
Repair the ones that get beat up.
Yeah, exactly, like patching up those battered troops. Think of them as the heart of your war machine. You gotta keep them going.
You know, it's a really clever way to show just how important production was in the real war.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, having control of resources and manufacturing that was crucial during World War II.
Yeah, it wasn't just about having brave soldiers.
No, not at all.
You needed to equip them. You needed to support them. And that brings us to the soldiers themselves. Aces in Armor doesn't just give you like a generic army, does it?
No, it doesn't.
You get to choose from different factions. We've got the US and Soviet Union. And get this, not one, but two German factions.
That's great.
And here's the catch. Each faction, they have their own special units, you know, their own strengths, weaknesses.
Yeah, that asymmetry.
That asymmetry.
It forces you to really think about your strategy.
Oh, absolutely.
Depending on who you're commanding, you can't just use the same tactics for everyone.
Right.
Like the US, they might be great at combined arms tactics, while the Soviets, they might overwhelm you with sheer force.
That's a good point. So we're not just talking about moving little plastic soldiers around a map here, are we?
No, we're not.
We've got infantry hitting the trenches,
Yeah.
tanks rolling across fields, artillery pounding away at the enemy.
And then just when you think you've got it all figured out, the aircraft, they come swooping in and dominate the sky.
It's like a whole other dimension to the battlefield.
It really is, and it's such a great way to show how all the different branches of the military, they work together. Just like in real warfare, if you want to win in Aces in Armor, you got to master combined arms.
Okay, so we've got factories to capture, different factions to lead, and this dynamic battlefield to navigate. But let's talk about the heart of it all, combat. What makes combat so exciting in Aces in Armor?
Well, it uses dice, so there's definitely an element of chance. But there's a really cool twist.
Oh, tell me about it.
As your units fight, they gain experience.
Oh, I like that.
And that experience gives them better odds when you roll the dice.
So the more battles a unit survives, the tougher they get.
Exactly.
It's like watching them go from rookies to seasoned veterans.
That's a great way to put it. You're not just managing a bunch of nameless soldiers, you're nurturing each unit. You're guiding them, and when they're lost, you really feel it.
Yeah, you feel that loss, for sure. Speaking of different units, we've got everything from basic infantry squads to those legendary tanks, like the Tiger and the Sherman. But there's one unit that always catches my eye, the Katyusha rocket launcher. That thing just screams firepower.
Oh, the Katyusha, yeah. A truly formidable weapon, both in the game and in real life. It can unleash these devastating barrages.
Oh, yeah.
But you gotta be careful, because it can also hit your own units if you're not careful.
Ooh, a double-edged sword. So just like in real warfare, knowing when to hold back is just as important as knowing when to attack.
Absolutely. It's all about calculated risks, positioning, and making the most of what you have.
And speaking of resources, those factories we mentioned earlier, they don't just churn out units, do they?
No, they don't.
They also generate income, which you'll need to buy new units, repair damaged ones, basically keep your war machine running.
It's a balancing act.
Yeah, there's a lot to manage.
Resource management is crucial. You can't just throw endless troops at the enemy. Got to think long term.
All right, so we've got the basics: factories, factions, terrain, combat, resources. But Aces in Armor takes it a step further with these optional missions, right?
Right.
Tell me more about those.
The missions, they add a whole new layer to the game. They introduce unique challenges and twists like unpredictable weather or even a hunt for a secret weapon.
So it's not just about conquering the map. You've got these specific goals and you have to adapt to surprises.
Exactly. You have to think outside the box, come up with creative solutions to unexpected problems.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that really stood out to me in the rules was the idea of intercepting units. You know, during movement,
Oh, yeah.
it seems like it adds a whole new level of tension to what could be a pretty straightforward phase.
What's interesting about it is that it forces you to think defensively.
Right.
You can't just assume your units will get where they're going safely.
You got to be ready for anything.
Exactly. You got to think like your opponent and anticipate their moves and be prepared to react.
It's like this constant back and forth trying to outmaneuver each other, block advances, cut off supplies.
It really is, and the ability to intercept depends on things like unit type range, even the terrain. It's a great example of how Aces in Armor rewards those who pay attention to the details.
So it's not just about having the biggest guns or the most troops. It's about using them strategically, coordinating their movements, and anticipating your opponent's actions.
Precisely a game that rewards clever tactics planning and a deep understanding of how it all works.
I'm already feeling like a general just thinking about it. But before we get too deep into the nitty-gritty of Aces in Armor, I think it's time we take a closer look at those factions we talked about earlier.
Let's do it. Each faction has its own unique style, and knowing their strengths and weaknesses is key to winning. Okay, so let's start with the US faction. What jumps out at you about their strengths?
Well, the first thing I notice is their focus on combined arms. Their units seem to work really well together. They're like a well-oiled machine, a force greater than the sum of its parts.
You got it. The US, they're all about coordinating attacks, using infantry tanks and artillery. For example, their artillery units, they have this special ability called Forward Observer.
Oh yeah, I've seen that.
It lets them boost the accuracy of friendly units nearby so they can really soften up the enemy before an attack.
It's like they're calling in pinpoint strikes. That's a perfect example of how the game mirrors the real U.S. military in World War II. They were masters of logistics and combined arms.
Exactly. And their tanks like the Sherman, maybe they're not the toughest, but they're reliable, not too expensive to produce, and they really shine when they have support from artillery and air cover.
Speaking of air cover, the U.S. has some impressive air power too, right? Like the B-17 Flying Fortress.
Oh, absolutely. The B-17, that's a game changer. It can carpet bomb enemy positions and inflict serious damage, but you gotta watch out because it's vulnerable to enemy fighters.
Right, so you need to make sure you have control of the skies before sending it out. It seems like playing as the U.S. is all about planning coordination and using each unit to its full potential. No room for reckless cowboys here.
Exactly. It's a team effort. Now let's switch gears and talk about the Soviet faction. What are your first impressions?
Well, if the U.S. is all about precision and coordination, the Soviets seem to be all about brute force and overwhelming numbers. Their infantry is known for being tough and relentless.
You're right on the money. The Soviet strength lies in their sheer numbers. They can field massive armies of infantry, and they're not afraid to use them. Their units might not be as individually powerful as some others, but they make up for it with quantity.
And they've got the Katyusha we talked about earlier. That thing is a beast. It can wipe out entire enemy formations in one go.
It's a powerful weapon, that's for sure. But as we said, it's a bit of a gamble. That indiscriminate firepower can be as dangerous to your own troops as it is to the enemy.
A high-risk, high-reward kind of weapon. It seems like the Soviets are also more willing to accept casualties. You know, those human wave tactics, sending wave after wave of soldiers until the enemy breaks.
Yeah, and the game reflects that their infantry units have a special ability for the motherland.
Oh yeah, I remember that one.
It lets them ignore the first point of damage they take, so they're really tough, especially early in the game.
So playing as the Soviets is all about harnessing that raw power and overwhelming your opponent with sheer numbers. A very different approach from the US, but equally effective if you know how to use it.
Exactly. Now let's move on to the German factions. Aces in Armor actually has two separate German factions, the Wehrmacht and the Waffen SS.
Okay, now this is where things get interesting. What's the difference between these two?
Well, historically, the Wehrmacht was the regular German army, while the Waffen-SS started as a paramilitary branch of the Nazi Party, but later on they became more integrated into the German war effort.
So how does that translate into the game?
In Aces in Armor, the Wehrmacht represents the well-trained, disciplined, and technologically advanced German army of the early war. Their units are all about quality over quantity, and they excel at combined arms operations.
I can see that they have some of the most iconic German tanks like the Panzer IV and the Panther. Those are known for their firepower and maneuverability.
Exactly, and their infantry, while not as numerous as the Soviets, they're well equipped, and they get bonuses from strong leadership. They also have specialized units like mechanized infantry, which combines the flexibility of infantry with the speed of armored transports.
So the Wehrmacht is all about precision efficiency and using their technology to their advantage.
Now, the Waffen-SS, they represent the more fanatical and ideologically driven elements of the German military. They're known for their aggression resilience and their willingness to fight to the very end.
I bet that comes in handy in a game like this.
Definitely. Waffen-SS units have this ability called fanatical, which lets them re-roll failed morale checks.
So they're less likely to break under pressure.
Exactly. They also have access to units like the Tiger tank, which is one of the most powerful tanks in the game. But it's also expensive and hard to produce.
So the Waffen SS is all about raw aggression, unwavering determination, and using elite units to smash through enemy lines.
That's a great way to put it. So now you've got these four very different factions, each with their own strengths, weaknesses, and playstyles. It really adds another layer of complexity and depth to the game.
It's like 4 games in one, but choosing a faction is just the first step, right? You still need to master deploying your units, managing your resources, and adapting your strategy to what's happening on the battlefield.
That's right, that's where the real challenge is. And that's what makes Aces in Armor so captivating and rewarding. It's not just about rolling dice and moving pieces, it's about making strategic decisions, anticipating your opponent's moves, and outmaneuvering them.
It sounds like Aces in Armor truly captures the essence of World War II strategy. It's not just about having the biggest army or the best weapons, it's about using them wisely, coordinating your efforts, and outsmarting your opponent.
Exactly. It's a game that rewards careful planning, strategic thinking, and a deep understanding of how it all works.
All right, I'm ready to dive deeper into the strategic side of Aces in Armor. Let's talk about some specific tactics and strategies that players can use to gain an edge on the battlefield. What are some key things to keep in mind?
One of the most important concepts in Aces in Armor is combined arms operations. As we talked about earlier, this means coordinating attacks using a mix of infantry, tanks, and artillery to create a powerful force.
So it's not just about sending your tanks in alone or relying solely on your infantry to hold a position. It's about using each unit type to support the others and create a more effective force.
Exactly. For example, let's say you're attacking an enemy position. You could start by using your artillery to bombard them, soften up their defenses, and lower their morale. Then you send in your tanks to break through their lines, followed by your infantry to secure the objective and mop up any resistance.
Like a well-choreographed dance of destruction.
That's a great way to put it. And each faction has its own strengths when it comes to combined arms. The US, for example, they excel at coordinating attacks, using forward observers to make their artillery more accurate. The Germans, on the other hand, they often benefit from using mechanized infantry to quickly transport troops and exploit breakthroughs made by their tanks.
So knowing the strengths and weaknesses of each faction is crucial for coming up with effective combined arms strategies.
Absolutely. Now, another key tactic to remember is flanking. This means attacking the enemy from the side or rear where they're most vulnerable.
I can see how that would be really effective, especially against units that are heavily armored in the front.
Exactly. Flanking can be devastating, but it requires planning and coordination. You need to have enough units to pull it off without leaving your own flanks exposed. And you need to consider the terrain and how the enemy might react.
Speaking of terrain, it seems like that plays a huge role in Aces in Armor, almost like it's another unit on the board.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Terrain can be your best friend or your worst enemy. You need to learn how to use it to your advantage, both defensively and offensively. Forests can provide cover for your infantry. Rivers can act as natural barriers, and hills can give your artillery a commanding view of the battlefield.
So it's not just about moving your units from one point to another. It's about choosing the best route, using cover, and exploiting the terrain.
Exactly, and certain terrain features can benefit certain unit types more than others. For example, tanks can move quickly on roads, but they're slowed down by forests and rough terrain. So if you're facing a lot of enemy tanks, you might want to try and lure them into a forest where your infantry can ambush them.
It sounds like there's a lot of strategic depth to the game. It's not just about having the biggest army or the strongest units, it's about using them smartly and adapting to the situation.
Absolutely. Aces in Armor is a game that rewards careful planning, strategic thinking, and a deep understanding of the game's mechanics. And it's a game you can play over and over again thanks to its replayability and the endless possibilities for trying out different strategies.
Speaking of trying new things, let's talk about some of the optional rules that can add even more variety and challenge to Aces in Armor. We've already mentioned missions, but what about things like unpredictable weather and the secret weapon hunt?
The optional rules are a great way to change things up and tailor the game to what you like. The unpredictable weather rule, for example, adds a random element to the game, simulating how weather can affect the battlefield.
So one turn, you might have clear skies and perfect conditions for movement, and the next turn you could be stuck in a snowstorm with limited visibility and movement penalties.
Exactly. It adds an element of unpredictability, forcing you to adjust your plans on the fly and think quickly. It can lead to some really memorable moments, like watching a well-planned tank attack get bogged down in mud.
A real tactical nightmare.
And then there's the secret weapon hunt, which you can find in some of the missions. This rule adds a hidden objective that players have to try and uncover. It could be a secret weapon, a hidden base, or an important person that needs to be captured or eliminated.
Like a mini mystery within the bigger game. I could see how that would add another layer of tension and excitement.
Absolutely. It makes players think differently, gather information, and take risks to achieve their goals. It can lead to some really dramatic moments, like a last-minute discovery that completely changes the course of the game.
It sounds like the optional rules really add to the replay value of Aces in Armor.
Yeah.
You can play the same map multiple times, but with different rules and missions, and it feels like a completely different game each time.
You're absolutely right, and that's one of the things that makes Aces in Armor so captivating and long-lasting. It's always evolving and offering new challenges, even for experienced players.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, from the basic rules to advanced strategies and optional rules. But let's step back for a second and think about the historical context of Aces in Armor. This game is set during World War II, one of the most important and devastating conflicts in history. How well do you think the game captures the feeling of that conflict?
It's a tough question. The designers of Aces in Armor, they've definitely done their research. They've really dug deep into the units, the weapons, the tactics, the whole feel of World War II combat. And they've managed to take all that complexity and turn it into a game that's both accurate and fun.
Yeah, it's not just a boring history lesson, but it also doesn't shy away from the realities of war.
Exactly. It finds that sweet spot between historical authenticity and gameplay. It doesn't try to recreate every single detail of World War II, but it does capture the core of it, the scale of the battles, the strategic challenges those commanders face.
And it shows the different sides of the conflict, each with their own strengths and weaknesses and their own stories.
Absolutely. It's not just some generic war game. It's rooted in the history of World War II, and that's what makes it so engaging.
I'm starting to see why Aces in Armor has such a dedicated following. It's more than just a game. It's an experience. It's strategic. It's historical. And it lets you command armies on a grand scale.
You nailed it. It can transport you to another time and place, immerse you in the strategies of World War II. And it can leave you with a deeper understanding of the sacrifices made by those who fought in that conflict.
Now, before we wrap things up, I want to touch on one more aspect of Aces in Armor, the game's components. The board, the miniatures, the dice, the cards, they all come together to create this really immersive experience.
Absolutely. The board is beautifully done with detailed terrain that makes those World War II battlefields come to life. And the miniatures are incredibly detailed, capturing all the little things that make each unit unique.
It's clear that the designers put a lot of love and care into making these components, and it really shows.
It's not just about how well it works, it's about creating an experience. Those high-quality components, they make the game look amazing, and they make it a joy to play.
And that's what it's all about, isn't it? Creating something that's challenging and rewarding, educational and entertaining.
Exactly. You said it. Aces in Armor is a game that anyone can enjoy, from seasoned veterans to folks who are new to strategy games.
It's easy to learn, but hard to master, a satisfying challenge for anyone willing to put in the time.
And you can play it in so many different ways, thanks to the different game modes, optional rules, and scenarios you can create.
So whether you're a history buff, a strategy game fanatic, or just looking for a fun and engaging game, Aces in Armor has something for you.
It can spark your imagination, test your strategic skills, and give you countless hours of enjoyment.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm ready to play a game of Aces in Armor right now.
Me too. But before we do that, let's leave our listener with one final thought. As you play Aces in Armor, remember that even though it's based on real events, it's still a simplified version of World War II. Does that make it a better or worse strategic experience?
That's an interesting question. I think it does both, in a way. On the one hand, simplifying things makes the game easier to understand and play. We don't get bogged down in every little historical detail, so we can focus on the main strategic elements.
You're right, but we also have to remember that real war is far more complex and unpredictable than any board game.
Absolutely. There are so many factors you can't account for in a game. The human element, the chaos, the fog of war.
Exactly, but I think Aces in Armor does an amazing job of capturing the spirit of World War II strategy, even with its simplifications. It forces you to make tough decisions, to weigh your options, to adapt to changing situations, just like those real commanders had to.
And that's what makes it so captivating, right?
Yeah.
It's not just moving pieces on a board. It's a mental battle, trying to outsmart your opponent and feeling the thrill of victory or the sting of defeat.
It really is, and you might even learn something about history and strategy along the way. You start to see why certain decisions were made, the challenges different sides faced, how even small choices can have big consequences.
You know, I've been thinking about the role of luck in Aces in Armor. Yes, there's dice rolling, so there's always some chance involved. But it seems like if you play well, you can overcome bad luck.
I agree. A good player can tilt the odds in their favor by making smart decisions about unit placement, what to target, and how to manage resources. You can't control the dice, but you can control how you set yourself up to make the most of good rolls and minimize the damage from bad ones.
Like they say, luck favors the prepared.
Exactly. And that's a valuable lesson from Aces in Armor, a lesson that applies to life just as much as it does to board games.
Well said. Now, before we go, I want to give a shout out to the people who made Aces in Armor. They've clearly put their heart and soul into creating a game that's challenging and rewarding, historically accurate, and strategically deep.
They've achieved something special, a balance that's not easy to find in board games. They've created a game that's both welcoming to new players and exciting for experienced ones, a game you can enjoy on many levels.
And most importantly, it's just plain fun to play.
Couldn't agree more so to our listener. If you're looking for a game that will make you think, immerse you in history, and entertain you for hours, look no further than Aces in Armor. It's a true gem.
And with that, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the world of Aces in Armor. We hope you've enjoyed the journey and that you're ready to conquer the battlefield with your newfound strategic brilliance.
Until next time, keep on gaming, keep on learning, and never forget the power of a well-timed flanking maneuver.
Engines roaring, the battle calls. Steel and fire will shake the walls. Tanks roll forward, skies ignite. The battlefield is set tonight. Missiles fly, the dice will fall. One last move can change it all. Hold your ground or take the sky. Victory waits, it's do or die. Aces and armor, thunder roars. Tanks and jets in the heart of war. Fortune favors the fierce and bold. Aces and armor, legends told. The smoke, the shadows glide. Fighters soaring, striking wide. Steel and tactics, speed and might. Only the strong will win this fight. Tactics, fire, strength and speed. A single shot could plant the seed. Charge ahead or hold your line. Glory comes to those who climb. Aces and armor, thunder roars. Tanks and jets in the heart of war. Fortune favors the fierce and bold. Aces and armor, legends told. Strike, the battle nears. Steel and fire drown out the fears. One last play, one last fight. Only the best will rule the night. Aces and armor, skies ignite. Steel and fire, take the night. Play your hand, sound the horn. Aces and armor, heroes born. Shadows bright, fire soaring, striking white. Steel and tactics, speed and might. Aces and armor, legends told. Through the smoke, the shadows glide. Fire soaring, striking wide. Steel and tactics, speed and might. Only the strong will win this fight. Tactics, fire, strength and speed. A single shot can plant the seed. Charge ahead or hold your line. Glory comes to those who climb. Through the smoke, the shadows glide. Fighters soaring, striking wide. Steel and tactics, speed and might. Only the strong will win this fight. Aces and armor, battle nears. Steel and fire drown out the fears. One last play, one last fight. Shoutout.